What if the shadows that lurk in every corner of a medieval dungeon tell tales of madness, despair, and unrelenting torment? Would you still crave the drama of a knight's quest if you knew the true price of admission was your sanity? Forget the gallant rescue missions, the dungeon's embrace is a vice, a cloak of secrecy draped over your very soul. You'd think iron bars and stone walls could contain mere prisoners, but no. They house nightmares, the kind that gnaw at the edges of your mind, taunting you with the whispers of the damned. Imagine the stench. Not the romanticized aroma of straw and sweat, but a pungent miasma of decay and despair that curls around your senses like a serpent ready to strike. The flickering torchlight reveals not heroic deeds but the skeletal remains of those who dared to hope. Your heart races, caught in a web spun by the very air, thick with the resignation of suffering souls. Each drip of water echoes like a tortured scream, a countdown to your own inevitable descent into madness. And let's talk about the company. Think a dungeon is just you and your thoughts? Think again. You share your new home with rats, fat, grotesque creatures with eyes gleaming like tiny obsidian stones. They scurry around your feet, feasting on the remnants of your dignity, while shadows dance in the flickering torchlight, conspiring against you. Would you barter your comfort for the companionship of a rat? They're the only ones that listen, but they don't care about your sorrows. They only care about the crumbs left behind, just as you'll care for nothing but your own survival. What about torture? The medieval dungeon isn't an isolated horror story, it's a carnival of cruelty. Picture the wicked devices of despair, the Iron Maiden, the rack, and the water torture, each more diabolical than the last, designed not just to break bones but to shatter spirits. And the executioners? They're not grizzled villains, they're laughing madmen, just like the trolls hiding in your childhood tales. They revel in your agony, feeding off your screams, turning your suffering into their twisted entertainment. And do you really want to barter with the demons that inhabit this hellish abyss? Every locked door hides a story of betrayal, and every echoing footstep could mean a fate worse than death. You think you're just a body? Ask the souls that linger in the shadows, forgotten and forsaken, if they'd trade places with you. They'll laugh, or maybe they'll cry, because there's no currency in this realm but despair. So, would you still raise your glass in toast to Knightly Valour? Would you still dream of glory when the reality of the dungeon is an unending nightmare? The truth is, the medieval dungeon is a seductive trap, drawing you in with tales of adventure while wrapping its chains tighter around your mind. Once you taste its bitter fruit, every sweet thought of heroism rots away, leaving nothing but darkness. The question lingers and beckons, how far are you willing to go to satisfy your curiosity? Would you risk it all, or is ignorance truly bliss? The choice is yours, but be warned, this dungeon has teeth, and they're hungry for more than just your flesh. A faint, sickly light flickered unevenly from the torches clamped to the damp stone walls, casting unsettling shadows that writhed like lost souls in the corners of the cavern. The air hung thick with the stench of mildew and something more primal, a fear. I could feel it coiling around me like a serpent, constricting my chest, squeezing out every breath. This was the dungeon, a grotesque monument to despair, where hope came to rot. I clutched the rusted hilt of my sword, my knuckles white with the effort to hold onto something, anything, that felt solid. My heart thundered in my ears as I pressed deeper into the darkness, the weight of my companion's gaze heavy upon me. Lysander stood a step behind, his eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears, fear mingling with the anger that had driven him here. He was a boy-turned-man, still too young to lose the innocence of laughter yet burdened by the memories of betrayal and blood. I remember the way he spoke of vengeance, his voice a low murmur, dripping with venom, they'll pay for what they did. But this wasn't a tale of heroism, it was an elegy for the damned. The walls whispered stories of those who had come before us, skeletal remains trapped in the very stones that surrounded us. Every creak of the dungeon felt like a warning, and I had begun to wonder which was worse, the monsters lurking in the shadows or the monsters lurking in our hearts. Marla, ambitious yet broken, had forged her path through life with a fierce determination that often bordered on madness. She was our guide, but even she hesitated as we approached the heart of the dungeon. This place, her voice trailed off, the bravado cracking, revealing a sliver of vulnerability. I remembered her laughter, bright and piercing, a sound that once felt like a beacon. Now, in this stifling blackness, it felt like a distant echo of a life she once knew, a life untainted by the weight of loss. "Marla, we can't turn back," I said, though I felt the tremor in my own voice. The truth was a double-edged sword, and we were all cutting ourselves on it. We pressed forward, the thrill of danger mingling with a heaviness that clung to our bones like a curse. Each step echoed, thud, 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 the heartbeat of the dungeon, synchronizing with my racing pulse. I could hear the distant drip of water, a cruel mockery of time slipping away. Tick, tock, it seemed to chant. Time was our enemy here, just as much as the beasts that prowled the darkness. I felt the ghost of regret whispering in my ear, we had come to seek vengeance, but the price was our sanity, perhaps even our souls. Then there was a sound, a low growl that reverberated off the stone walls like rolling thunder. Lysander flinched, his eyes darting around, searching for shadows that danced just beyond reach. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice quaking. I nodded slowly, the weight of unspoken fears hanging heavy in the air. "What if it finds us first?" he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush, a stream of panic. I reached out to steady him, tracing the planes of his young, terrified face. In that moment, I saw not just a boy fueled by anger, but a soul tormented by uncertainty. I remembered the stories we'd told ourselves, that we were the heroes, the righteous avengers, but in this pit of despair, those stories felt like thin veils over the relentless truth. Marla shifted beside us, her breath hitching. "We can't let it win. We have to face it." The fire in her eyes wavered, but beneath the surface, I could see the flickering light of resolve. This dungeon was not just a labyrinth of stone but an intricate web of our fears and failures, each twist and turn a reflection of our darkest selves. "Face it," I said, my voice almost a laugh, bitter and hollow. "What if facing it means losing everything?" The words hung between us like a knife, sharp and glinting in our shared dread. And then the growl morphed into a snarl, feral and hungry, the sound tightening like a noose around our throats. The air thickened, swirling with a palpable dread as shadows stretched and elongated before us. I could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline on my tongue, and the world around me blurred, a kaleidoscope of fear and desperation, raw and unrelenting. In that moment, a realization struck me like a thunderbolt, a clarity that cut through the darkness. We were all architects of our own despair, and the design was intricate, each element carefully crafted by choices made in the light of day, now laid bare in the suffocating shadows. The laughter, the love, the vengeance, it all coalesced into this dungeon of despair, this tomb of dreams. And as the creature emerged from the depths, a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and bone, I felt a chill creep up my spine. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent hunger that echoed the very essence of our fears. This was not just a monster born of nightmares, it was the embodiment of our regret, our pain laid raw and unfiltered. It was our reflection. "Stand your ground!" Marla shouted, voice trembling yet fierce, a warrior's cry amidst encroaching despair. Lysander and I exchanged glances, unspoken words hanging heavy between us. We were trapped not just in the dungeon, but in the spirals of our own hearts, our own designs of despair. And then the confrontation loomed, thick and heavy like the air before a storm. Each heartbeat thundered in my ear as the shadows closed in, and the walls reverberated with our fears, blending with the growls of the creature that stalked us. There was no escape, no retreat, we were here, in this moment, and it was endless, a cycle of terror woven into the architecture of our design. It was a trap, beautiful and terrible, an echo of our own making. And as we drew our weapons, our breaths quickening, I realized that sometimes, to confront despair, we must first face ourselves. I braced for the chaos, for the confrontation, for the heart-wrenching truth that lay just ahead, pulsing in time with our frantic hearts. A flickering torch cast shadows that dance like lost souls on the damp stone walls. The air is thick with the stench of mold and despair. I can hear the echoes of distant cries, punctuated by the drip of water, falling like tears from the ceiling, a reminder that this place is not just a prison but a grave for forgotten dreams. I shiver, not from the cold, but from the weight of memories buried deep beneath the surface of these ancient stones. I stand beside Elara, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin line of resolve, eyes wide and luminous like the moon caught in a storm. She's been here before, in this place where shadows twist into the shapes of the damned. She remembers the chains, the whispers of countless voices that linger like ghosts. We have to keep moving, she breathes, her voice a fragile thread in the chilling air. Fear grips her heart, but there's anger too, a smoldering ember that refuses to die. She's here to find her brother, lost to the dark history of this prison, a history that gnaws at her soul like rats on decaying flesh. Beside her, crouched in the corner of this dungeon, is Tom, a riddle of scars and secrets. His hands are rough and calloused, a testament to a life spent in servitude, but his eyes hold a flicker of rebellion. He should have been a knight, but fate twisted him into a lowly scribe, relegated to writing the stories of others while his own lay dormant. I remember when the king had us write tales glorifying his conquests, he mutters bitterly, his voice a dagger that slices through the silence. But what of the tales of the innocent? What of those who were dragged here for crimes they didn't commit? The walls seem to pulse with the weight of his words, each syllable a heartbeat echoing in the void. A distant clang reverberates through the passageways, and Elara's grip on Tom's arm tightens. The sound is a reminder that they are not alone, never alone, in this malevolent fortress. I can't shake the feeling that the very stones have ears, they live and breathe the despair of those who came before, the weight of their stories etched into every crack and crevice. Do you think he's still alive? Elara asks, her voice barely a whisper, as if saying it louder would shatter whatever fragile hope she clings to. I can see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the fear of a sister's heart breaking under the weight of uncertainty. He has to be, Tom replies, his voice steadier than his trembling hands. If anyone can survive this hell, it's him. But even as he speaks, I can see the shadows in his heart, the doubt mixing with the desperation. As they press on, I can feel the history of the dungeon swirling around us, a miasma of sorrow and brutality. Once a storage for grain and valuables, the cold stone had transformed into something far more sinister, a cage for the innocent and the guilty alike. Kings and tyrants had drawn the dark lines of power here, their laughter echoing like a death knell down the passageways. The walls whisper of tortured souls, of forgotten pleas that died along with their bearers, leaving only the chilling echoes behind. Do you hear that? Elara stops, her breath hitching. A soft scratching, like fingernails on stone, sends chills racing down her spine. The sound intensifies, clawing at the edges of sanity, wrapping around their hearts in an icy grip. It's just rats, Tom whispers, but even he can't mask the tremor in his voice. Rats, yes, but also the memories of the damned, what are they, if not echoes of the past? They press deeper into the darkness, the shadows thickening, wrapping around them like a suffocating shroud. The air grows heavier, thick with despair and the faint scent of decay. Elara's heart races as she recalls the tales told by the village elders, of prisoners who vanished without a trace, of the dungeons that devoured hope whole. What if we're too late, she murmurs, fear clawing at her insides. What if he's one of them? Stop it! Tom snaps, anger flaring like a flame in the suffocating gloom. You can't think like that. He's still here, I know it. His voice cracks, betraying the vulnerability beneath his bravado. In that moment, we see the cracks in his armor, the fear of failure that gnaws at him. He carries the weight of his own past, a life spent chasing shadows, forever out of reach. But here, in this unholy place, he fights for redemption, his heart beating against the darkness that threatens to consume them all. The torch flickers, and for a brief moment, light dances across a door, ancient and weathered, its hinges rusted with neglect. I remember stories of the door, Elara breathes, almost reverently. The one that leads to the heart of the dungeon. A shiver runs through her, a reminder of the legends, the tales of torture, of broken bodies and shattered souls. This door, this threshold, holds the promise of salvation or the abyss. Tom pushes it open, the creak of the door echoing like a scream. The darkness inside waits, pregnant with possibilities and nightmares. As they step through, I can feel the walls closing in, the air thickening like the weight of despair pressing down on their shoulders. Elara's heart races, pounding like a war drum, while Tom's breath hitches in his throat. Together, they take the final step into the unknown, where every shadow could be a friend or a foe, where every heartbeat could be their last. The dungeon stretches out before them, a labyrinth of secrets, a graveyard of hopes. The air crackles with tension, and I can feel it, a storm brewing, the promise of confrontation thick on the horizon. The darkness whispers, taunts, and challenges them to confront not just the horrors of this place, but the shadows lurking inside their hearts. And as they stand poised on the brink of revelation, the past and present collide, echoing through the stone halls. It's here, in this crucible of fear and hope, that they will confront their demons, and I just know, this is only the beginning. The story doesn't end here, it hangs suspended in a fragile balance, teetering on the edge of despair and redemption, a heartbeat away from truth. The damp chill of the dungeon seeped into the bones, clinging like a lover unwilling to let go. I remember the echo of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, resonating against the stone walls, a cruel reminder that time was an enemy here. Shadows danced, flickering like candle flames about to die. One could almost hear the whispers of the past, a jester's laughter, the clink of chains, the soft, despairing sighs of those who had fallen from grace. Trapped in this grim sanctum, hope was a distant memory, flickering like a dying light. Lucien stood in the corner, his heart pounding like a war drum. The air was thick with the scent of mold and fear, the remnants of dreams long buried. He had never imagined himself ending up here, a consequence of petty theft. Just a loaf of bread, he had thought, just one small act of desperation, a desperate attempt to silence the growling of his empty stomach. But now, locked away, he clutched the iron bars, feeling the cold bite of reality. How fragile was the line between survival and crime? He felt like a ghost of his former self, lost in the morose echo of his choices. "I remember," he muttered, his voice barely audible, "the taste of that bread." His mind spiraled back to a sun-drenched afternoon, when laughter filled the air, and he had believed that the world was an endless feast. How naive he had been, wandering the cobbled streets with dreams as bright as the summer sun. Now, that brightness was replaced by the dim light of his cell, a bottle of despair waiting to shatter within him. Cecily, the flower of the village, had once walked beside him. She had been his light, her laughter a balm to his wounded soul. But poverty had twisted them, reshaped their fates like clay in a potter's hands. Now, she was gone, imprisoned for a crime of her own, a crime of love that had turned sour. The eyes of the townsfolk had judged her, labeled her a witch, casting her into the dungeon as if she were an unwanted shadow. "I remember," she whispered from the dark, her voice a haunting lullaby. "The way the sun kissed my skin, how the petals danced in the wind." Her soft sobs echoed off the stone walls, the despair in them wrapping around Lucien's heart like a vice. They had stolen love's fleeting moments, and now love had stolen them in return. The irony twisted like a knife in his belly, sharp and unyielding. In a distant corner, a figure lay huddled, wrapped tightly in the rags of his own shame. Edgar, the town's butcher, stolen away in the dead of night for slanderous talk, words slipping from his tongue like poisoned wine. "I told them what they wanted to hear," Edgar often said, eyes wild and manic. Just a jest, but jesting in a land of superstition was a dance with fire, and he had burned. The shadows of the dungeon whispered secrets of his life's folly, transforming laughter into the echo of his chains. "I remember," he would mumble during feverish dreams, lost in a haze of guilt and regret. "The way the meat hung in the cool air, how the blood ran red, vibrant against the starkness of our lives." The irony was not lost on him. He was a butcher, yet he'd been cut down, reduced to nothing more than a snippet of gossip, a rumor gone awry. In the cold embrace of the dungeon, Lucien, Cecily, and Edgar formed an unholy trinity, bound by their crimes and the consequences that loomed like specters over their heads. They shared stories to keep the darkness at bay, weaving threads of their past lives together like a tattered tapestry, but each tale only reminded them of the bright world they had lost. A sudden clang broke through the heavy silence, a rattling of keys that seemed to echo through the very marrow of their bones. The door swung open, revealing a guard whose eyes were two stones devoid of compassion. "Time's up," he barked, the words harsh and cruel, ripping through the fragile fabric of their shared moment. Lucien's heart raced. Would it be a trial? Would there be a chance, however fleeting, to plead his case? But deep inside, he knew the grim truth. The dungeon had no empathy. It swallowed dreams like the abyss, leaving only whispers and shadows in its wake. Cecily stood, her eyes glimmering with something that felt like defiance, an ember refusing to be extinguished. "We will not fade into nothingness," she cried, her voice echoing fiercely against the stone. "We are more than our sins." But the guard merely scoffed, a wicked grin playing on his lips. "Your spirit won't save you, girl." The finality of his words hung in the air, a judgment cloaked in the darkness. And yet, there was a flicker of hope, a glimmer of rebellion igniting within them. Lucien felt it too, an ancient fire, a whisper of freedom clawing its way out of the dungeon's icy grip. The three of them were not merely victims, they were survivors, entangled in a web of choices that had brought them here but had also made them who they were. "I remember," Lucien breathed, lifting his chin defiantly. "I remember the wind on my face, the laughter of children, the taste of freedom. They can't take that from us." And in that moment, as the guard stepped closer, the heaviness of despair lifted, if only for a heartbeat. It became a moment carved in time, a heartbeat pulsing with the promise of resistance. The dungeon around them was a cage, but their spirits soared, refusing to bow before the chains that sought to bind them. Time twisted, the cosmos blinked, and for a brief instant, they felt infinite, beyond the reach of their crimes. The past, the weight of their choices, loomed like an ominous shadow, yet the glimmer of hope flickered, a candle fighting against the storm, an unyielding spirit yearning for the surface. The moment hung in the air, electric, alive. Fear mingled with hope, and the line between despair and rebellion blurred. They were broken, yes, but they were not defeated. The dungeon's darkness may engulf them, but their spirits would not be extinguished. Each heartbeat echoed the mantra, "We are still here, we are still alive." And as the guard moved to seize them, they braced themselves, hearts pounding, ready to face whatever came next, because sometimes, in the darkest places, hope shines the brightest. The air hangs heavy, thick with the stench of sweat and despair, a miasma that seeps into the very bones of the chained souls. I am one of them, shackled not just by metal but by a haunting silence that echoes in the dimness of my captivity. I recall the moment it all shifted, the instant the world I knew fractured like glass. It was a night draped in shadow, where the moon hid, ashamed perhaps, and I felt the first cold chain wrap around my wrist, a bitter embrace that promised only torment. "Keep still." I remember the guard's voice, sharp as a blade, slicing through my resolve. Yet all I could do was tremble, a leaf caught in a storm. Beside me, Sarah's eyes, once vibrant and filled with laughter, now reflected the dull, flickering light of despair. She had been my anchor, my sister in this nightmare, her strength a balm for my fading spirit. But now, even that light flickered, dimmed by the weight of our reality. "Do you think we'll ever see the sun again?" Her whisper was like a ghost in the darkness, haunting and fragile. I wanted to promise her, to weave words of hope, but the knot in my throat tightened. The truth was a boulder, heavy and unyielding. The chains clinked, a bitter symphony that underscored our plight. I remember the days, or maybe they were years, morphing into a blur of fear and longing. The walls of our cell felt like they were creeping in, pressing against my skin until I could hardly breathe. Each tick of the clock, a cruel reminder of time slipping through our fingers like sand, slipping into the void of nothingness. I would close my eyes, imagining the outside world, the way the sun would warm my face, the laughter of children echoing in the streets, a reminder of life beyond these chains. But each time I opened my eyes, the reality flooded back like a cold wave crashing over me, and I'd see the pale stone, the rusting chains, hear the distant cries of others, their torment intertwining with my own. A cacophony of despair that choked me, making me wish for silence, even amidst my own thoughts. "Focus on the stars," I would tell myself, trying to rise above the agony. "They are still there." But even they seemed far away now, buried beneath layers of despair and darkness. Then I'd catch Sarah's gaze, and for a moment, hope flickered, maybe, just maybe, we would escape this hell. But deep inside, I could feel the weight of despair creeping back, wrapping around my heart like those chains around my wrist. "Let's make a plan," Sarah said one day, her voice tinged with determination. It was a spark, a flicker of rebellion igniting in the hollow of our existence. If we can distract them, the way her eyes lit up, filled with an ember of defiance, made me want to believe. But what could two broken souls do against the tide of cruelty that held us? My heart raced, a wildfire of urgency clashing with the cold reality around us. Each moment spent in thought was a moment lost to the darkness. I knew we had to act, yet every plan felt like a whisper against a storm. Even when we tried to speak of escape, our voices trembled, echoing fearfully off the stone walls, and I could see the shadows creeping closer, as if the very walls were alive, listening, waiting for our resolve to falter. There were days when the fear consumed me, dark and clawing, much like the way the shadows would stretch out, silhouetting our figures, reminding us that we were prisoners in a story without an end. And then there was Thomas, the third member of our wretched tableau. He was a man who had once danced with dreams, now reduced to a whisper of his former self. His laughter had once been infectious, a beacon that lightened the heaviest of hearts. But now, he rarely spoke, his spirit crushed beneath the weight of despair, a ghost haunting our cell. I often watched him from the corner of my eye, the way he stared vacantly at the wall, lost in a labyrinth of his own making. "Do you remember?" I would start, but my words would fall like stones. He would nod, but his eyes were lost in a memory far removed from us, a life lived beyond these walls, a life he would never return to. The silence would stretch, a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken fears. The days morphed into an agonizing rhythm, an endless loop of hopelessness. Each voice outside our cell became a reminder of our insignificance, a haunting echo that told us we were nothing more than shadows, forgotten in a world that buzzed and thrived beyond our reach. I remember once, the sound of laughter floating in from a nearby courtyard, sharp and piercing, like shards of glass, cutting through the fabric of our reality. "Are we ghosts?" I whispered to Sarah one night, the question slipping from my lips like a prayer. "Are we just echoes of what once was?" Her eyes were wide, shimmering with unshed tears, and I realized then that our humanity was all we had left, our memories, our connections. Even as we sat in chains, we were alive. The moment of crisis arrived when the guards grew restless, more brutal, more careless. Their laughter echoed through the halls, a grotesque mockery of our despair. I felt the tension coil, a living thing, wrapping around us, squeezing until I couldn't breathe. That night, as the moon cast a pale light through the barred window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, something inside me snapped. "We have to do something," I breathed, a whisper turned raw. Sarah's gaze met mine, a flicker of the old fire igniting. "Tonight," she said, her voice trembling with fear and courage. And just like that, the chains became a part of me, a dull ache that echoed my resolve. I could feel the pulse of adrenaline coursing through my veins, mingling with the pulses of fear and hope intertwined. It was a dance, an eternal struggle, a fight against the darkness that had swallowed so many before us. As I prepared to take that first step into the unknown, I felt a flicker of something powerful, a defiance that had been buried deep within. The world outside might not welcome us back, but I refused to let it claim my spirit. I glanced at Sarah and Thomas, their faces lit by the flickering shadows of our prison, and I knew then that we would either be free or fall together. There was no turning back. The night stretched infinitely before us, a canvas painted with the colors of our fears and dreams. The chains rattled softly, a haunting lullaby as we prepared to break free from the silence. The moment hung in the air, heavy with unspoken promises, and I took a deep breath, ready to step into the terrifying unknown, together as a family forged in the fires of despair. The door creaked open, a weary groan echoing through the damp stone hallway. The air hung heavy, thick with despair that seeped from the very walls, an odor of decay and despair so potent it clung to the throat. I remember the way the darkness seemed to swallow the flickering torchlight, the shadows dancing like lost souls in this wretched underworld. I stepped in, heart racing, each heartbeat a drum signaling the march of death and desperation. There it lay, the dungeon, a stinking pit of human misery. Piles of excrement, a grotesque mosaic of filth and foulness, cluttered the floor like a twisted offering to the gods of despair. Even the rats, bold and gluttonous, seemed to hesitate before the sheer horror of it all. A musty aroma of sweat and unwashed bodies wrapped itself around me, cold and clammy, making each breath a labor. I was not merely an observer, I was a participant in this grotesque theatre of suffering. In the corner, crouched like a beaten animal, was Tom, a figure broken yet unyielding. His eyes, once bright with rebellion, now flickered with the dim embers of survival. "They think we live here," he rasped, his voice a fragile whisper, torn between sarcasm and sorrow, as if this is home. "But you know what they say, home is where the heart is, and mine's buried with the rats." I could only nod, choked by the hopelessness that filled the air like a noose tightening around my throat. Tom had once been a soldier, a fierce warrior with dreams of glory, now reduced to a wretch in chains. I could almost hear the echoes of his past, the clang of swords, the shouts of victory. But now? Now he was just a man who had been stripped of his dignity, his life reduced to scavenging for scraps in a pit designed for no one to survive. His spirit wrestled with the filth of his body, each day a testament to the cruelty of his captors, a struggle that felt both absurd and tragic. And then there was Eliza, the maiden of misfortune. She sat against the wall, her once lustrous hair now matted and tangled, her gown tattered and streaked with grime. "I remember the last time I saw the sun," she murmured, her voice barely more than a sigh threading through the oppressive silence. It felt like a warm embrace, one you forget in the clutches of this darkness. Why did no one tell me love could rot? I watched as despair twisted her features, the remnants of hope collapsing under the weight of decay. Eliza had been a lady once, adored and envied, attending grand feasts where the music danced on gilded tables. Now she was little more than a ghost, her presence a haunting reminder of all that had been lost. Her eyes, once vibrant, now reflected the muck and mire around her, a mirror of the fate that awaited us all. "I bathed once a year," she laughed, a sound both beautiful and tragic, "and it was a luxury." So yes, romance was earthy. It was a dark humor, a fragile defiance against the inevitability of their plight, and I couldn't help but smile through the tears that threatened to spill. As the hours slithered by, time felt meaningless in this pit. The faint sounds of water dripping, mingling with the distant cries of the tormented, became a warped lullaby, lulling us into a trance where despair blended with resignation. The only light came from the flickering torch, casting grotesque shadows that played tricks on the mind. I felt the weight of their stories, the oppressive silence pressing down on me, thick like a fog that refused to lift. I remember nights spent listening to Tom recount tales of valor, tales of blood and glory, punctuated by the laughter of men who had once lived freely. But those tales turned sour in the dampness, becoming echoes of a life that had become a cruel joke. "What is glory?" he'd ask, his voice rising in anger tinged with pain. "It's just a fancy word for a grave. How long until the stench of failure overpowers even the filth we live in?" And Eliza, oh Eliza, with her heart still beating wildly beneath her dirt-streaked skin. "You have to find beauty in the horror," she would insist, her eyes gleaming with a madness that spoke of survival. "This muck, this foulness? It's our tapestry. We are the artists of our own despair. Look closely, and you'll see the colors blend." Her fingers would trace patterns in the dirt on the cold stone, as if trying to sketch a reality that was brighter than this darkness. But the truth was, there was no escaping it. The truth was, we all wore masks, the mask of survival, the mask of defiance. The filth was our reality as much as the darkness that enveloped us. Tom and Eliza were each fighting their own battles, their souls intertwined like the roots of a tree desperately seeking water in the parched earth. They were my comrades, my fellow prisoners, yet they were also reminders of my own fragility. In that moment, surrounded by the wretchedness of our existence, I felt the cold grip of fear tighten its hold. The dungeon was alive, pulsing with the horror of its history. Each drop of water hitting the floor echoed the fate that awaited us outside those stone walls, a fate that promised only darkness. I could feel the creeping dread, the anxiety clawing at my insides, a reminder that we were all just one misstep away from becoming yet another ghost in this haunted place. Tom's laughter broke the tension, a hollow sound reverberating through the dank air. "If we're going to die here, let's at least go out with a joke." He leaned closer, eyes gleaming with a dangerous spark. "What did the rat say to the prisoner?" "You're the one who's filthy." I couldn't help but chuckle, the absurdity of it piercing through the veil of despair like a shard of glass in my heart. And as I sat there, in the foulness of that dungeon, something shifted. The laughter echoed against the stone walls, reverberating through the darkness, intertwining with our fears and dreams. It was a small triumph, a moment of rebellion against the overwhelming horror. Perhaps, in this pit of despair, we could still find flickers of hope, however twisted and grotesque they may be. After all, even in the darkest places, laughter can break through the suffocating silence, even if just for a heartbeat. But as I looked around, the shadows deepened, a reminder that hope is a fragile thing, often flickering like the dying flame of our one flickering torch. Because as laughter faded into the stench of sweat and death, I knew fear was still lurking. It would always be lurking. The door slammed shut, reverberating through the damp, claustrophobic room like a shot fired in the dark. The sound lingered, echoing off the cold, sterile walls, as if to announce the finality of despair. In that moment, the air thickened, wrapping around me like a vice, squeezing breath from my lungs. It was the kind of silence that screamed, a predator lurking, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I looked to the corner where shadows pooled, and for a fleeting heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure, a flicker of movement, but it was just my mind, playing tricks on me, feeding on my fear. Each heartbeat struck like a clock ticking down to an unknown execution. Maya pressed her back against the wall, the rough texture digging into her skin, yet the pain was a welcome distraction from the storm raging inside her. She could still hear the echoes of laughter that once filled the halls, the vibrant colors of life before confinement. But now, here it was gray, a monochrome, devoid of hope. She recalled the way the sun filtered through the windows, how warmth danced on her skin. But now, in this prison of her own making, even the sun had become a ghost, a memory taunting her from behind bars. I remember, she whispered to herself, the way it felt to be free. I remember, the words hung heavy in the air, a fragile promise she clung to, even as they slipped away like sand through her fingers. Across the room, Ethan sat in a corner, knees pulled to his chest, eyes darting to every corner as if expecting the walls to close in. His thoughts spiraled like a tornado, each panic-fueled notion colliding with the next, a cacophony of dread. He was a soldier in an unseen battle, fighting against the shadows that whispered secrets he was too terrified to grasp. "I can't breathe," he murmured, as if saying it aloud could summon air back into his lungs. The isolation gnawed at him, a relentless hunger that fed on his sanity, leaving behind a hollow shell. "I remember," he echoed Maya, "the smell of rain on pavement, the taste of life. Time folded in on itself, a cruel trickster. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days, and an eternity into a single heartbeat. The walls, once solid and unyielding, began to warp, twisting under the pressure of their collective fear. They became a living entity, pulsating with tension. Every creak, every groan, was a reminder of their confinement, a soundtrack to their despair. Shadows flickered, dancing just out of reach of reason. That night, the darkness was thicker, suffocating. Maya's eyes were wide, staring into the void, seeking solace in the abyss. She thought she saw her mother's face, the gentle smile that had once been her anchor. "Where are you?" she cried into the silence, her voice cracking, desperation spilling out like blood from a wound. The memory was a bittersweet balm, but it cut deeper than she wished. Fear gnawed at the edges of her sanity, clawing its way through the fragile veneer she had built. "I need you," she whispered, as if the cosmos would heed her call and send her mother back to shield her from the encroaching dark. Ethan's heart raced, adrenaline surging as he caught the sound of something, a scraping, a whisper of movement. The shadows bloomed around him, curling and writhing like living tendrils. He felt the weight of eyes upon him, unseen yet palpable, and the realization struck him like a thunderclap, they weren't alone. "What's happening?" he gasped, panic clawing at his throat as he searched Maya's face, her features twisted in worry. Together, they were a congregation of fear, their breaths mingling in the stillness, a fragile tether binding them against the encroaching isolation. As if summoned by their shared dread, the lights flickered, casting erratic shadows that twisted into grotesque shapes. Maya pressed her palms against her ears to block out the chaos of her own thoughts, but the silence roared louder. It was a madness that seeped through the cracks, filling the air with the scent of decay as memories turned into nightmares. "This can't be happening," she gasped, her voice trembling. But as the shadows deepened, so did the realization that within this confinement, they were each other's salvation and downfall. The walls whispered secrets, feeding their fears, but also beckoning them to confront what lay within. And in that confrontation, a flicker of hope ignited. Together, Ethan breathed, a fragile thread connecting them amidst the chaos. We have to face it. We can't let it win. With that, they stood, two figures against the dark, trembling yet resolute. As they faced the shadows, the room seemed to expand and contract around them, a living entity that could either crush or liberate. The past, haunting and vivid, collided with the present, swirling like smoke in a storm. "Do you hear that?" Maya whispered, her voice barely a breath. The echoes of memories, laughter, moments blurred by time and fear, became a collective chant, a chorus urging them to break free. Ethan nodded, eyes fierce with determination, heart pounding in rhythm with the unnameable force that was gathering all their fears and hopes into one undeniable truth: they were not alone, and together they could spill their darkness onto the floor, reclaiming the space that had become a prison. As they took a step forward, the shadows receded, curling back as if retreating from the light they had ignited within themselves. But the battle was far from over, and the weight of their isolation still hung around them like a shroud. They were not free, not yet. The psychological toll of confinement pressed down, suffocating yet oddly liberating, a paradox that would shape their journey ahead. The pulse of fear quickened, but alongside it, a flicker of defiance sparked. Time paused, the universe holding its breath as they stood on the precipice of a truth long buried. Fear could imprison, but it could also illuminate. The air was thick with the scent of iron and sweat, a cloying reminder of the human body's fragility. In that dimly lit dungeon, shadows twisted in the flickering torchlight, as if alive, whispering secrets that only the damned could hear. The sound of chains rattled, a grim symphony underpinning the silence, punctuated only by the soft whimpers of a soul caught in the clutches of torment. I remember the first time I laid my eyes on the rack, its wooden frame splintered, stained with stories of those who had met its cruel embrace. My heart raced then, just as it does now, a prisoner of the moment. It was a simple contraption, yet it promised exquisite agony. The groans of metal stretching and flesh tearing echoed through my mind, each sound a reminder of mortal limits, of the thin line that separates life from the abyss. In the far corner, a figure huddled, wrapped in shadows and despair. Ilara, once a fierce rebel, now a broken whisper of what she had been. I could see the fight flickering in her eyes, still alight with defiance, even as the chains bound her to that cold stone wall. "They think they can break me," she murmured, voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. I wanted to believe her, but the truth gnawed at me, devouring hope like a moth to flame. Across the room, the jailer stood, an imposing figure cloaked in darkness. His laughter bubbled up like the malicious hiss of a serpent, a sound that sliced through the air, leaving a trail of dread in its wake. "You think you're strong, girl? Strength is nothing against suffering." Each word dripped with malice, a cruel taunt that tightened the noose around my heart. I could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and suffocating, as if he were extracting every ounce of fear from our souls. Then there was Marcus, my friend, my anchor. Bound to a chair of splintered wood, his body bore the marks of torment, bruises blossomed like dark flowers across his skin. I watched as he winced, the pain tearing through him like a jagged wave. "Ilara," he croaked, voice barely a whisper, "don't give in. We'll find a way." But I could see the shadows in his eyes, the flicker of doubt that danced like fireflies in the dark. The tormentors were merciless, wielding their tools with a chilling ease. I could see the gleaming blades, the cruel hooks, each a promise of pain. The Iron Maiden loomed in the corner, a grotesque beauty that welcomed victims with a mouth of sharp spikes. I shivered, remembering tales of its victims, how they had entered with a flicker of hope, only to be transformed into a tapestry of blood and agony. Remember the tales of the ancients. I whispered to Marcus, the words spilling out, desperate to distract from the reality enveloping us. "They say even the strongest warriors fell before such horrors." My voice trembled, but I pressed on. "They bathed once a year, you know. So yeah, romance was earthy." A fleeting laugh escaped him, breaking the tension, a small candle flickering against the storm. But laughter, like light, can be fragile. Ilara's gaze turned steely, her resolve hardening. We are not tails. We are flesh, and flesh can bleed. The truth hung between us, a cold reminder of the stakes. What happens when the unbreakable breaks? When the pain becomes a familiar spectre, whispering sweet nothings while it gnaws at your very essence. The jailer approached with a sadistic smile, the glint of a dagger catching the light. Time to play, he crooned, a cruel twist to his words. And then he drew closer, the dagger dancing in his fingers, a serpent ready to strike. Let's see which of you can endure the longest. Marcus's breath hitched, and I felt my heart race, a drum throbbing in the silence. Ilara's body tensed, muscles coiling like a tight spring. You can hurt us, but you'll never own us, she spat, defiance pouring from her lips. My heart swelled with admiration in that moment, a brief flicker against the impending darkness. But dread seeped deeper, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I remembered the words of old, pain is a teacher, relentless and unforgiving. The thought of what awaited us twisted my stomach into knots. I knew the tools, the thumbscrews, the branding irons, each one a promise of agony laid bare before us, a testament to humanity's darkest inventions. The jailer's laughter echoed in the chamber, a grotesque melody that wrapped around us like a noose. You think you have strength? I will show you weakness. With a swift movement, the dagger plunged towards Ilara, and I felt every heartbeat, every breath, laden with the weight of impending doom. Time twisted, warped under the strain of fear. I could feel the pressure building, a relentless tide threatening to crash over us. I saw Marcus's eyes widen, felt the heat of desperation rising within me. The air thickened, heavy with the anticipation of pain, the dread of what was to come. And then, just as the world seemed to hold its breath, the dagger halted, a breath away from Ilara's flesh. Let's see how long you last, the jailer hissed, a venomous promise hanging in the air. In that moment, the chamber pulsed with unspeakable tension, every soul caught in a web of fear, defiance, and a flickering hope that refused to die. This was the edge of despair, where every heartbeat echoed in the darkness, and the tools of pain loomed large, waiting to unravel what little was left of our sanity. With every passing second, the threat of suffering loomed over us, a dark cloud that threatened to swallow our humanity whole. In the heart of that dungeon, hope struggled against despair, a fragile candle flickering in a storm. And as I stood there, gripped by fear and longing, I knew one thing: our stories were far from over, each moment a heartbeat away from release or ruin. The shadows clung to the damp stones of the prison cell like a second skin, the air thick with the scent of iron and decay, every breath a struggle against the foulness surrounding me. I watch as a flickering candle casts grotesque silhouettes on the walls, twisted figures that dance as if in mockery, echoing the agonizing cries of the ill and wounded locked away in this tomb of despair. The sound of dull thuds reverberates through the corridor, the shuffle of guards, the groans of the suffering, the echoes of a reality so bleak it defies comprehension. I remember the day I was dragged into this hell, the cold steel of shackles biting into my flesh, my spirit already broken before I crossed the threshold. I was a mere whisper of who I once was, reduced to a shadow, an echo of dreams long extinguished. The others here, my fellow inmates, each carry their own scars, both visible and hidden. There's Bertram, his body twisted from the fever that ravaged him, his once vibrant laughter now replaced with ragged gasps. I can still hear the way he spoke of the open fields, the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, before the sickness claimed him. Now, he lies on the ground, his skin pallid and clammy, a marionette with its strings cut, a puppet who once danced through life. And then there's Eliza, a girl no older than 16, clutching her abdomen as if it might shield her from the pain that claws at her insides like a feral beast. She spent her days weaving dreams from the tattered threads of hope, spinning tales of freedom and love. But desperation has a way of stealing dreams, and I watch as the brightness in her eyes dims, replaced by the haunting shadows of suffering. Her laughter, once sweet as spring flowers, now feels like shards of glass, sharp and painful. I can't escape the feeling that we are trapped in a grotesque play, our suffering a spectacle for the universe, a cosmic joke. When the guards do bring food, it is a pallid broth that could hardly be called sustenance, a grim reminder that survival here is not guaranteed. Sometimes, a rat scuttles by, its beady eyes reflecting our despair. It's a miracle if you can find humor in it. I often wonder if its life is worth more than ours, gallivanting through the filth, free of the chains that bind us. One night, as the cold seeped into my bones, I heard Bertram choking on his own cries. The sound twisted my insides, a visceral reminder of our fragile mortality. I stumbled toward him, my heart pounding like a distant war drum. "Bertram," I rasped through dry lips, "stay with me." But he was lost, his breath a ragged whisper trailing off into silence, taken by the very thing that had kept him company in this wretched place, the fever, the illness, the relentless decay. I remember the time I clutched his hand, willing warmth into his fingers, and whispered tales of the outside world, birds soaring through the azure sky, the sun kissing the earth, laughter ringing like church bells. I told him of my own dreams, those ephemeral things that felt like a slap to the face now. I could see his eyelids flutter, a flicker of life still lingering, and then he was gone. The candlelight trembled, casting an even darker shadow over my heart. Eliza, too, seemed to fade with each passing day, her body wasting away, but her spirit, oh, her spirit, and I clung to it, desperate not to let it slip through my fingers. I often found her staring into nothingness, a haunted look clouding her bright eyes. "What do you dream of, Eliza?" I would ask, hoping to invoke the remnants of joy. "Do you still see the sea?" "I dream of fire," she would whisper, her voice trembling. "Fire that purifies, that cleanses, how beautiful it must be to feel its warmth instead of this cold." The irony twisted in my gut like a dagger. Fire, the very thing that could destroy us, was also what we craved, a warmth that seemed alien here among the damp stone and despair. I longed to cradle her, to shield her from the madness, but I was powerless, merely a spectator in our own tragedy. As the days bled into one another, the whispers of mortality became a haunting lullaby. I began to take solace in the tiniest of moments, the flicker of a candle illuminating the walls, the sound of water dripping from the ceiling, the way the shadows shifted with the movement of the moon. Time felt like an endless loop, a dance of suffering, yet within that dance was an unyielding thread of hope, however frayed. And then came the night when I awoke to the sound of Eliza gasping, the air thick with desperation. I stumbled to her side, my heart a hammer against my ribs. Her skin was slick with sweat, her breath shallow and uneven. "Stay with me, Eliza," I begged, my voice cracking. "Please." Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and something else, an understanding, perhaps. "I see them," she murmured, clarity flickering like the candlelight. "The ghosts of those who came before us. They whisper tales of freedom." The ghosts. I shivered at the thought. They were the shadows that haunted our dreams, the echoes of lives lost within these unforgiving walls. "What do they say?" I asked, trying to grasp at the thread of her consciousness. They say we are more than this. We are more than hunger and pain." Her voice trailed off, and a tear slipped from the corner of her eye, carving a path through the grime on her cheek. I held her hand tightly, squeezing until I could feel the warmth fading beneath my grip. "Fight, Eliza. Please." But in that moment, I realized the truth, the fragility of existence, the cruel hands of fate that clasped their icy fingers around our throats. I remember the silence that followed, a heavy, suffocating quiet that wrapped around us like a shroud. Bertram was gone, and now Eliza, she was slipping, like grains of sand through my fingers. The shadows grew longer, heavier, whispering secrets of despair, and I felt my heart shatter, piece by piece, until all that remained was an echo. As the candle flickered, I heard the distant sound of footsteps approaching, and dread pulled in my stomach. The guards, the spectres of authority, came to remind us of our insignificance, of our places in this macabre play. They pushed the door open, casting a harsh light into our sanctuary of suffering. I steeled myself, heart racing, aware that whatever came next would change everything. And at that moment, as reality collided with the spectres of our dreams, I understood we were not just prisoners of our bodies or these stone walls, we were prisoners of time itself, caught in the relentless grip of a fate that offered no solace, only shadows and cries that echoed in the night. The sound of a plastic bottle crumpling echoed through the empty hallways, a haunting reminder of desperation. I was there, crouched behind the dilapidated wall, my heart thudding in my chest like a war drum, each pulse urging me to breathe quietly, to hold my breath against the darkness that draped over us like a funeral shroud. Each sound, my ragged inhale, the soft shift of fabric against skin, felt amplified. In the suffocating silence, the fear was a palpable entity, lurking in shadows cast by flickering candles that barely held their ground against the encroaching night. I remember when food was abundant, when we took for granted the ease of a full stomach, the joy of a simple meal. Now, it felt like a distant dream, a ghost of a time we could never recapture. The air was thick with the scent of desperation, flavored with the bitterness of starvation. My stomach twisted, gnawing like a beast, a reminder that I was alive, that I was still here, battling the darkness both outside and within. Beside me, Anna's breath quickened. She was trembling, her fingers curling around the last piece of stale bread we had scavenged. It was more than bread, it was a lifeline, a thread keeping her anchored in this grim reality. I could see the war waging in her eyes, the flicker of hope fighting against despair, the primal instinct to survive clashing with the burden of conscience. She was so young, too young for this. At 17, she should have been daydreaming about love and laughter, not rationing crumbs. "I can't," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "I can't eat it all. You need some." I shook my head, the weight of her sacrifice pressing down on me like a leaden blanket. "No, Anna. You have to. You need your strength." But inside, I was screaming. How could we have come to this? How could we have let our lives spiral into this abyss where the taste of freedom became the flavor of despair? Anna's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and I felt my own heart break at the sight. This wasn't just about food, it was about survival, a survival that felt more like a slow, torturous death. In this life, where shadows clung to every corner and every whispered promise turned hollow, we were rationing more than just food and water. We were rationing our hope, our humanity. And then there was Caleb, the stoic sentinel of our little band. He had seen things, too many things that clawed at his spirit. His shoulders were heavy with the burden of decisions made in the name of survival, decisions that marred the innocence of youth. I watched him now, a ghostly figure in the flickering candlelight, his hands clenched into fists. The shadows betrayed him, stretching his form into something monstrous, something that spoke of desperation and dread. "Caleb," I said softly, as if my voice could reach the part of him that still clung to the man he once was. "What do we do?" He turned, his eyes darkened pools reflecting the chaos of our world. "We wait," he said, his voice low, gravelly. "We wait for nightfall, and we hope. It's all we can do." But there was no hope in his tone, only resignation, as if he had already buried the last remnants of faith deep within the earth. I felt a chill creep up my spine, a whisper of something sinister lurking just beyond our fragile encampment. The darkness had a life of its own, breathing and pulsing with malice. It was the spectre of hunger, the shadow of thirst that hung over us like a guillotine ready to fall. We could hear the distant wails of those who had succumbed to the void, their cries a symphony of suffering that echoed through the empty streets, a constant reminder of what awaited us if we faltered. A soft rustle snapped my attention back to Anna. She was nibbling on the crust of the bread, her eyes darting to the shadows as if they might come alive and consume us whole. "I remember," she began, her voice trembling. "When the lights were still on, and we could just walk to the store. I remember chocolate bars, warm soda," her words trailed off, choked by the weight of longing, the grief of nostalgia twisting in the pit of our stomachs. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I was there again, in the warmth of summer days, the laughter of friends, the clinking of ice in glasses. "I remember," I echoed, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I remember the taste of freedom." Caleb's gaze shifted towards the parting shadows. "But freedom has a price," he murmured, as if the very air around us was thick with reminders of the choices we had made. "And sometimes," his voice faltered, "the truth too heavy to bear. Sometimes, it's not worth paying." The darkness was closing in, and I could feel it wrapping around us, squeezing until it was hard to breathe. The rationing of food and water had become the rationing of life, and every day felt like a slow march towards our own end. We were ghosts in our own existence, reduced to the barest essentials of being. A tremor ran through me as I thought of what we had lost, what we could never reclaim. I wanted to scream, to fight against the tide of despair. I wanted to break free of this existence that felt more like a tomb than a world. But fear held me captive, and I could sense it lurking in the darkness outside, waiting for the moment to invade our fragile sanctuary. "Tomorrow," Anna whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. "Tomorrow we'll find more food. I promise." But it felt like a dying promise, fragile as glass. As I looked into her eyes, the flickers of hope danced precariously on the edge of an abyss where dreams turned to nightmares. I knew, deep down, that the dawn would bring more of the same, more rationing of life, more battles against the darkness that threatened to consume us whole. And in that moment, surrounded by shadows and lingering ghosts of a life we once knew, I understood that this wasn't just a fight for food or water. It was a fight for our very souls, a desperate clinging to the threads of humanity that still tethered us to existence. The night stretched around us like an unyielding cloak, but I felt a strange resolve building within me, a flicker that refused to be extinguished. As the shadows whispered secrets of despair, I promised silently to myself and to Anna and Caleb that no matter how dark the night, we would continue to ration our hope. We would stand against the tide, together, even as the world crumbled around us. The air hung heavy, a shroud of dread wrapping around the stone walls, each crack whispered stories of the damned. I could almost hear the echoes of desperate screams, the silent pleas of forgotten souls, forever trapped in the bowels of a world that reveled in their suffering. The dampness seeped into my bones, the cold, iron bars loomed before me like a judgment passed long ago, and I realized, control dwelled here, in these wretched dungeons, where power played its cruel games. "Lucia," a voice broke through the echoing darkness, low and grating. It was Marcus, his face pallid and gaunt, shadows clinging desperately to his features as if they sought refuge from light. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep coming back." I didn't answer. My heart raced like a wild drum, each beat a reminder of the truth I had buried deep within. The memories clawed at me, fierce and unyielding, those nights when laughter turned to blood, when hope turned to ash. "I remember how it felt," I whispered, staring past him, into the abyss. "I remember being terrified of the dark, but I'm terrified of the light even more." "Stop," he hissed, his eyes flickering with panic. "You'll draw attention. They'll come." They hung in the air, a spectre of authority that wielded iron fists and merciless glares. The warden, a grotesque figure looming in the shadows, ruled this realm with a penchant for cruelty. He reveled in the power he wielded, a twisted puppet master pulling the strings of fear and despair. The inmates were merely pawns on his chessboard, and each move he made sent tremors through the hearts of the living and the dead alike. I recalled the first time I had come here. The corridor stretched interminably, the sound of chains rattling like a lullaby of horror. I had felt drawn to it, like moth to flame, the scent of decay intoxicating. But within moments, the thrill faded like smoke in the wind. I witnessed the bodies, gaunt, eyes hollowed by despair. A soul tethered to this earth, shackled by injustice. "What is it you seek?" a voice echoed in the dark recesses of my mind, a question that held no answer. "I can't stand by," I said, my voice trembling. "Not while they suffer. Not while he." "Lucia," Marcus interjected, stepping closer, urgency thickening the air between us. "Every time you step into this place, you risk everything, your life, your freedom. You can't save them all. You know that. But how could I? As long as the warden reigned, the cries of the innocent would be swallowed by the darkness. I could feel it, that gnawing sensation deep within, the echo of their despair curling around my heart like cold fingers. The injustice ignited a flame inside me, a hunger that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I have to try," I replied softly, feeling the weight of the choices ahead, choices that could lead to liberation or death. "Listen to me," Marcus pressed, his voice quaking with unspoken fear. "You think you're a savior, but you're just a spark in a storm. You'll get us both killed." The walls seemed to close in, a claustrophobic reminder of our own mortality. I scanned the shadows, feeling their weight as they danced around us, mocking our existence. The stench of rot permeated the air, a reminder of the countless lives extinguished in this forsaken place. Maybe, I murmured, but I refused to be complicit in their silence. I could almost hear the faint whimper of a child, the plea of a mother, the haunting laughter of someone who had once been free. Their voices echoed, a cacophony of despair, and I could no longer ignore them. With sudden resolve, I stepped forward, the chains rattling like a dirge behind me. As I approached the iron door, an overwhelming sensation washed over me. Was it fear? Or was it the thrill of rebellion? The warden's power loomed large, dark, and heavy like a storm cloud ready to burst. But I would not be silenced. I had tasted the bitterness of oppression too many times. With each step, the weight of my choices pressed down on me, but I could feel the fire within intensify, igniting a fierce determination. The door swung open, a creaking sound that echoed my heartbeat. I was met with an abyss of despair, the flickering torches casting haunting shadows. The prisoners were there, faces ashen, eyes filled with a mix of hope and dread. "Please," they whispered, as if uttering my name could summon my salvation. But I could feel the weight of their expectations. It settled heavily on my shoulders, a cloak woven from their agony. Who controls the dungeons? I found myself asking the air, seeking answers from unseen forces. The warden? The guards? Or was it the very system that fed on despair? I was a mere fragment in this brutal reality, and yet here I stood, defiant. Each face I met was a mirror reflecting my own fears, of powerlessness, of complicity, of futility. I saw Marcus behind me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and longing, wishing for escape but knowing the chains binding us were not merely iron but ideology, tradition, and the ruthless machinery of control. "Lucia," he warned again, stepping closer, fear etched into his features, "this isn't a fairy tale. You can't rewrite the ending." "But what if," I replied, voice trembling, "what if I'm just a thread in a tapestry waiting to be woven into something new?" The walls pulsed with a life of their own, shadows shifting, whispering secrets of rebellion and fear. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the very stone walls were aware of our desires and dreams, mocking them. And yet, within this suffocating atmosphere, a spark of hope flickered. I could feel it in the air, the potential for change, the possibility of a crack in the facade of power. But who would be brave enough to embrace the storm? I took a step toward the prisoners, the heat of their desperation radiating like a fever. "You are not alone," I proclaimed, my voice rising above the dark. "I am here. We are here. We fight together." But doubt slithered in. Would they believe me? Would they follow my lead, or had the darkness consumed them entirely? In that moment, it became clear, I was a flame dancing in the wind, fragile yet fierce, and the winds of power and oppression would not extinguish me without a fight. "Lucia," Marcus called, but I was already stepping forward, toward the abyss, where the light was dim but not extinguished. The heart of the dungeon pulsed like a living thing, a dark spectre, and I took another step, every heartbeat an act of defiance against the looming shadow of the warden and his iron grip. And the darkness whispered back. The air was thick with dampness, a miasma clinging to the stone walls like a forgotten memory, a shroud of despair. I could hear the echoes of distant chains clanking, a morose symphony that sent shivers down my spine. Here, in this subterranean hell, time stretched and twisted, moments folded into each other like the creased pages of a forsaken book, each turn revealing a dark chapter. I stood in the gloom, heart racing, breath shallow. The flickering torchlight cast shadows that danced and flickered, whispering secrets only the walls knew. A figure stirred in the corner, a silhouette barely discernible beneath the grime. Elise, the once celebrated lady of the court, now reduced to little more than a ghost of her former self. I remember the way she used to glide across polished floors, laughter filling grand halls. But now, her laughter was replaced by hollow echoes, her eyes sunken and dark, a reflection of despair. "You were supposed to save me," she rasped, the words heavy with accusation, a blade drawn in the dark. What could I say? I was just a nobleman, a pawn in a game far larger than bloodlines and riches. My family's name crumbled under the weight of treachery, our banners stained with betrayal. I could feel the chains tightening around my heart, every blink parting the veil of denial. I remember the court, how it thrummed with ambition, conspiring whispers winding like tendrils through opulent banquets. Did you think they would spare me? Elise continued, her voice a fragile thread that threatened to snap. Did you think they would care? She pressed her palms against the rough stone, as if seeking solace from its coldness. I watched her, helpless, drowning in regret. Each moment here was a reminder of the chasm that separated us. I was supposed to be her protector, yet here she languished, a political prisoner, an ability stripped of power, dignity tossed aside like rotting fruit. The dungeon walls absorbed her pain, echoing it back, a cruel mockery of her past glory. Remember when we plotted our escape, she murmured, her gaze drifting into the void as if searching for fragments of a life that felt like a dream. Under the stars, we thought we could conquer the world. I remember those nights, the laughter spilling over like wine from a goblet, how naive we were. As her memories danced around us, a door creaked open, splintering the darkness. Heavy boots clattered on the stone, each step a warning. The warden, a hulking figure with the eyes of a predator, filled the doorway. I could taste the bile rising in my throat, fear seeped into the cracks of my resolve. Elise, I whispered, urgency gripping my tongue. You must, but the warden's laugh cut through my words like a guillotine. No escape for you tonight, my lady. His voice was a low growl as he stepped into the flickering light, a grotesque shadow looming over her frail form. My heart thundered, the air electric with tension. I could feel the heat of anger rising within me, an ember that had long been dormant. Yet, what could I do? My hands trembled at my sides, impotent against the weight of authority. I was bound not by chains, but by a feeble loyalty to a crumbling title. Leave her be! I shouted, the words echoing through the dungeon, wild and desperate. She's done no wrong. The warden's eyes narrowed, a predator sizing up its prey. Done no wrong, he sneered. She dared to challenge the crown. A fatal mistake. Elise's gaze pierced through the darkness, there was defiance in her eyes, a spark that flickered against the despair. I will not be broken, she declared, her voice rising above the suffocating air, the brave song of a lark in a storm. But I could hear the tremor beneath her resolve, the fear buried deep. Watch closely, my lord, the warden taunted, moving closer to Elise, looming like a storm cloud. This is what defiance reaps. The chains rattled as he reached for her, the sound sharp, like glass shattering, a moment suspended in time. I could feel the darkness pressing in, a suffocating blanket. Would I stand and watch? Would I let the flicker of her spirit be snuffed out? The room spun, memories flashing, the vibrant festivities of court life, laughter echoing through gilded halls, the sweet taste of freedom dancing on our tongues. But now? Now, the world had become a nightmare draped in shadows, a haunting reminder of what we had lost. Remember the orchard? Elise's voice cut through the chaos, a fragile thread of hope, pulling me back. We can escape there again, can't we? But could I promise her that? The walls seemed to whisper, mocking my uncertainty. I clenched my fists, my resolve hardening like iron. They may keep you in chains, but they will never hold your spirit. The warden's laughter filled the air, a chilling echo, he was a demon feeding on fear. The darkness hung heavy, but Elise's defiance ignited something within me, a flicker of rebellion. Let her go! I roared, stepping forward, the warmth of courage flooding my veins. I will not let them take you from me. Silence fell for a heartbeat, suspended like a tightly drawn bowstring. I could feel the raw power of that moment, charged with desperation and courage. The world outside the dungeon had fallen away, leaving just us, nobility stripped bare, souls laid open. I remember the shadows creeping back, the chains clanking in the stillness, the heartache blooming like a dark rose. The warden's eyes narrowed, and in that singular moment, I saw the precipice before us, one step into the abyss or a chance to reclaim what had been lost. And there, in the agonizing silence, the weight of our choices loomed larger than the stone walls enclosing us, the promise of defiance flickering like a candle's flame in the night. The chains rattled, the shadows whispered, and the heart of rebellion was born anew, ready to ignite in a world that had become all too familiar with darkness. The cold metal clang of prison bars reverberates down the corridor, sharp and unyielding. In that moment, a chill races down my spine. I'm standing there, heart pounding like a distant war drum. The smell of sweat and despair hangs heavy in the air, a miasma swirling around me, thick and suffocating. I can feel the weight of desperation crawling up my throat as I tread into the belly of this beast, this concrete tomb where lives go to rot. And there, behind the bars, I see her. Jasmine. Her face is a canvas of anguish and defiance, eyes wild like storms threatening to unleash. She's been here for 3 years, a victim of a system that never meant to protect her, just to silence her. I remember the last time I saw her outside these walls, the way her laughter sliced through the night air, bright and intoxicating. Now, it's swallowed by the shadows, a haunting echo of what used to be. I can't breathe in here, she whispers, her voice a broken melody. Every day is a countdown to nothing. I want to reach through the bars and pull her into the light, but I know the truth, the light is a privilege, and she's been stripped of it. Behind her, a flicker of movement, a man, burly and hardened, leans against the wall, the very embodiment of despair. That's Terence, a ghost of the streets, a man molded by poverty. He's here for a crime that wasn't his, but the world sees him as a statistic, a number in a system rigged against him. I remember when we thought we could beat this, he says, his voice low like a rumble of thunder. When the streets were ours and hope felt like something we could touch. His words hit me like blows, each phrase a reminder of dreams crumbling beneath the weight of reality. The world outside continues to spin, blissfully unaware of the battles fought in these silent chambers where humanity is caged. I can see it in their eyes, the flicker of rebellion, the spark of life that refuses to dim. Yet, it is overshadowed by a palpable sense of defeat, a resignation that grips their hearts like a vice. I want to scream at the injustice, to rail against a society that puts a price on freedom, that turns a blind eye while the rich make deals behind closed doors, while the poor rot away in cells like forgotten relics. The clock ticks, each second a reminder of time lost, and I can almost hear it whispering secrets of a world that doesn't care. Jasmine's fingers brush against the bars, a ghostly caress as if trying to touch the sky beyond. They don't see us, you know, she murmurs, her voice barely a breath. We're just invisible. The word hangs in the air, heavy like a shroud, and I feel the weight of it settle over us. Every prison cell is a microcosm of a cruel society where class determines fate. Jasmine and Terence are not just statistics, they are living, breathing souls caught in a system that thrives on inequality. The privileged walk free, while the impoverished languish, their lives reduced to mere transactions, a sad reality that shifts like quicksand, swallowing them whole. Outside, the sun is setting, casting long shadows that creep across the world, and I can't help but think of the dreams that fade. Jasmine once wanted to be a dancer, spinning through life with grace, her body an expression of freedom. But here, her limbs are shackled not just by metal but by the weight of her past. I remember the way she moved, how the world seemed to bend to her will, how she made the night sing with her spirit. Now, all that remains is a flicker of that light, dimmed by loss. I was going to change everything, she admits, her voice cracking like fragile glass. But it feels too late now. It's never too late, Terence murmurs, his eyes fierce, ignited by a glimmer of hope. We just have to fight harder. And there it is, the heartbeat of resistance, the pulse of the oppressed. In this place of shadows, they grasp onto hope like a lifeline, refusing to let it slip away. I can feel the tension in the air crackling like static, the promise of confrontation looming on the horizon. As I stand there, the walls begin to close in, a suffocating reminder of the world's indifference. I wonder how many people pass by these bars every day, oblivious to the lives trapped within. I remember the nights I spent at home, safe and sound, while Jasmine and Terence faced the cold reality of these walls, shadows trapped in a waking nightmare. I can hear the distant clatter of the guards' boots, a grim reminder that freedom is a luxury, not a right. The system is a monster, devouring the weak while shielding the powerful. I want to scream, to shake the foundations of this place until it crumbles under the weight of oppression. I want to claw at the very fabric that separates us, to force the world to see the faces behind the bars, their pain, their dreams, their humanity. But the clock ticks on, relentless and cruel, and I know I must go. The moment hangs like a breath caught in my throat, and I see them, Jasmine and Terence, shadows in the dusk, a fierce reminder of everything I cannot change. I want to hold on to them, to freeze time in this moment of raw intensity, but life pushes me forward. As I turn to leave, I hear Jasmine call out, her voice echoing through the corridor, "Don't forget us." And just like that, I'm swallowed by the shadows, the weight of their words pressing against my chest, a haunting reminder that the fight is far from over. The world outside continues to turn, but in here, the struggle for dignity and justice rages on, an eternal battle against the night, a desperate plea for awakening from the slumber of indifference. The clock ticks. The shadows stretch. And I carry their voices with me, a chorus of hope against a world that refuses to listen. The iron door creaked open, a slow, deliberate groan that echoed through the dark, damp stone chamber. In that moment, the scent of despair and cold earth wrapped around me like a shroud. I stood, heart racing, as a figure emerged from the shadows, my brother, Thomas. His eyes, once bright with hope, were now sunken, haunted like an old tree stripped bare of its leaves. I remember the way his fingers trembled, brushing against the barred window that barely let in the pale light of dawn. Freedom was a cruel joke, a distant whisper. "Margaret," he rasped, each syllable a silent scream, "you must believe me. I did not kill him." His voice cracked, the weight of his accusation hanging in the air like a noose. I felt the chill seep into my bones, that moment suspended in time, tainted by hopelessness. I remember the day they took him, a warm afternoon, laughter echoing through the village like birdsong. I can still hear the laughter, mingling with the scent of blooming heather. But laughter turned to shrieks as the guards burst through our door, faces twisted in fury. "Murderer," they bellowed, dragging Thomas from the hearth, where he had been whittling wood with tender care. The world shifted. The laughter faded into a hollow echo of despair. I was left holding nothing but the splintered remnants of our lives, pieces I couldn't mend. They claimed he'd killed Lord Hargrove, a man whose very name dripped with the power of the crown, whose death sent ripples through every corner of our small village. Everyone knew the truth, but the truth was a fragile bird, easily crushed beneath the weight of authority. My heart ached, a raw wound that never healed. "I remember," I whispered, choking back the tide of memories. "I remember the way you smiled at me, the way you spoke about dreams of travel, of escaping this cursed place. Dreams now scattered like dry leaves in the autumn wind. Would you believe me if I told you they'd lock me away too?" I couldn't help but smile, a bitter twist of my lips. It felt absurd, laughing in the face of such horror. "Don't say that," he snapped, the fire of his spirit flickering beneath the surface. "You have to fight, Margaret. You have to," but the words fell flat, lost in the damp air. I could see it in his eyes, fear. Fear that his sister, the only light left in this dismal abyss, would suffer the same fate. I reached through the bars, grasping his hand, the warmth of his skin igniting a flicker of courage. But courage was a fragile flame, easily extinguished. Outside, the village went about its routine, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding behind those stone walls. The baker's cart rattled by, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the rot of the world. Children played in the dirt, their laughter a mockery of our despair. The world continued, a cruel reminder that life could be so joyous while ours was a festering wound. I wanted to scream, to shake the villagers awake, but who would listen? Who would dare challenge the will of the powerful? Thomas squeezed my hand, a silent promise. "I will find a way. I will prove my innocence." His voice was a fragile thread, weaving hope through the dark tapestry of our reality. But the world was a cruel mistress, and hope often wore the mask of deceit. As the days turned to nights, I spent every moment searching for a way to save him. I gathered whispers, shadows of truth that danced in the corners of taverns. I learned of Lady Eleanora, the Lord's wife, who had secrets of her own, secrets that could unravel the fabric of this injustice. But whispers in the dark were dangerous. They carried the weight of the gallows. I had to tread carefully, my heart pounding with every step into the unknown. Then came the night when the moon hung low, a silver coin tossed into the sea of darkness. I crept through the village, guided by the flickering torches like souls searching for salvation. The wind howled, a mournful song that clung to my skin. Fear prickled at my neck, but determination pushed me forward. I found Lady Eleanor's estate, an imposing silhouette against the starry sky. Shadows danced in the windows, ghosts of secrets too heavy to bear. My heart thundered, each beat a drum urging me on. I had to know if the truth was hidden within those walls. The door creaked open, and I stepped into a world painted with both luxury and decay. The scent of incense hung heavy, mingling with the musty smell of forgotten dreams. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on me, ghosts whispering warnings in my ears. But I was undeterred, driven by the love for my brother, a love that could ignite even the darkest corners of despair. Lady Eleanor appeared, draped in silks that flowed like the river, the embodiment of elegance marred by the weight of her own secrets. "What do you seek, child?" Her voice was velvet, smooth yet sharp, a blade wrapped in silk. "I seek the truth," I declared, every word a prayer, no, a challenge. The very air crackled with intensity. I had to be brave, for Thomas, for the innocent. Her eyes narrowed, a predator assessing its prey. This world is not kind to those who seek it. But I pressed on, the fire inside me refusing to be snuffed out. "You know the truth behind my brother's imprisonment. You know who truly killed Lord Hargrove." The words tumbled from my lips, raw and unfiltered, a plea hanging heavy in the air. In that moment, time seemed to freeze, the cosmos holding its breath as the tension twisted around us like an unbreakable chain. I felt the pull of fate, the universe aligning for a brief instant, a flicker of hope, a glimmer of resolve. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper as enticing as it was foreboding. "Then, child, you must be ready to pay the price." The shadows loomed larger, the stakes higher, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of the universe pressing down on us. Would I lose everything? Would I stand alone against the dark tide of injustice? With the world spinning around us, I made my choice. For Thomas. For the innocent. And as I took that step into the unknown, I felt the darkness close in, shadows whispering tales of desperation and hopelessness. But I was far from done. The flame within me burned brighter, ready to face whatever horrors awaited. As the walls closed in, I understood one thing: the fight had only just begun, and the fate of the innocent hung precariously in the balance. The air is thick and heavy, every breath an act of defiance against the oppressive darkness that looms. A flickering torch casts trembling shadows across the damp stone walls, illuminating half-forgotten memories, whispers of anguish that echo through the ages. Somewhere in the distance, a drip of water punctuates the silence, a heartbeat, a reminder of life in this forsaken abyss. I remember the moment the door slammed shut behind us. The finality of that sound still reverberates in my bones, a metallic clang that sealed our fate. Clara's wide eyes reflected the dim light, fear mingling with resolve, her breath quickening as she gripped my arm. She was the brave one, or perhaps the foolhardy, really. "We have to move," she urged, her voice a thin thread weaving through the thickening dread. There was a flicker of defiance there, too, but I saw it, the crack beneath her bravery. "We all wear our masks, don't we?" Hers simply shattered under the weight of this dungeon's despair. Beside her, Marcus shifted uneasily, his fingers drumming against the pommel of his sword, a nervous rhythm that danced between courage and trepidation. He, too, bore scars from a life lived in shadows, haunted by echoes of choices he wished he could unmake. I could feel his fear straining against the silence, a raw undercurrent that threatened to pull us into the depths of madness. "I can't do this," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. The words hung in the air, heavy and cloying, suffocating us all. The dungeon had a pulse, an ancient heartbeat that thrummed beneath our feet. I could almost hear the stories it told, of betrayal, of despair, of souls lost to the gnashing teeth of darkness. I remember the legends of this place, the tales of those who entered, drawn by greed or foolishness, never to return. The executioner's glee echoed in my mind, they bathed once a year. So yeah, romance was earthy. I chuckled at the absurdity, the morbid humor that slipped from my lips like a desperate prayer, but Clara's gaze cut through my laughter, the fear etched on her face pushing me to confront the truth. We pressed forward, guided by the flickering flame, deeper into the belly of despair. The stone walls seemed to breathe with us, alive with the weight of forgotten souls. I could feel their eyes on us, feel their history swirling around us like a cold embrace. Each step became a confession, each breath a solemn oath to the past. "This place is cursed," Clara murmured, her voice barely escaping her lips, and for the first time, I felt the tremor of doubt creep into my own heart. A sudden sound, a distant wail, sliced through the stillness, sending shivers racing down my spine. I saw Clara freeze, her eyes wide as she turned to me, searching for reassurance. "But what can you offer in the face of such terror?" I felt small beneath that weight, as insignificant as a whisper in a storm. The legends warned of the shadows that lived here, of the tortured souls bound to the walls, shackled by the horrors of their past. Ghostly figures flitted at the edges of my vision, flickering like candle flames before being snuffed out. "Do you remember the stories?" I asked, my voice trembling. The prisoners who cried out for mercy, only to be met with silence. My mind flooded with the history etched into these stones, each tale a crush of despair, a reminder of humanity's darkest impulses. I remembered the wretched faces, the echo of laughter that twisted into screams, the despair that clung to the air like smoke. Marcus stepped closer, his face pale, sweat glistening on his brow. "I just want to go home," he breathed, but the dungeon curled around us, tightening its grip. I wanted to comfort him, but the truth was that none of us may ever leave. The thought clawed at my insides like a ravenous beast, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. A flicker of movement caught my attention, a shadow shifting just beyond the torchlight. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum. "Did you see that?" I croaked, the words heavy on my tongue. Clara nodded, her face paling further. The legends whispered of creatures lurking in the dark, of things that should not be, and I felt their presence. They were here, perhaps even laughing at our folly, delighting in our very humanity. As we pressed on, I could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening like the tension in the room before a storm. I caught glimpses of symbols carved into the stone, runes of old magic, twisted and broken. They whispered secrets from the past, tales of those who sought power and found only despair. I thought of the executioners, the dark jesters of fate, laughing as they led their victims down to the depths. Each step was a reminder of what could go wrong, of how quickly things could unravel. And then, silence. The kind that devours sound, leaves nothing but a deafening void. We stood in a chamber, vast and cavernous, the torchlight flickering against the walls, revealing grotesque carvings of agony and ecstasy entwined. It was a shrine to sorrow. Clara's breath caught in her throat, her hand finding mine, squeezing tight as if I could shield her from the very essence of despair that hung in the air. But it was too late. The darkness had seeped into our bones, the fear had taken root, and I felt it unraveling us. I could see their shadows, the lost souls, dancing just beyond reach. They beckoned with bony fingers, mouths twisted in silent screams, begging us to join them. "Run," I whispered, the word barely escaping my lips before the shadows surged forward, an unholy tide that swept through the chamber, hungry and relentless. Time lost meaning in that moment, each second stretching into eternity as our feet pounded against the stone, the echoes of our desperation mingling with the wails of the damned. In that heart-stopping moment, as we fled from the nightmares clawing at our backs, I realized something: the dungeon was not just a place. It was a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears, our darkest desires. This cursed labyrinth would hold us forever, a tapestry woven from the threads of our choices, our regrets. I remember the panic in Clara's eyes, the way she stumbled, the way I reached out to catch her. I remember the taste of fear, a metallic, sharp, and the knowledge that legends are not mere stories, but living, breathing entities that can consume you whole. And as the shadows closed in tighter, I understood, perhaps too late, that the true battle was not against the darkness outside, but the darkness within. As we raced against time, I felt the weight of history upon us, an inexorable pull that would lead us deeper into this maze of despair, where legends became reality, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cold, damp air of the cell pressed against her skin like a suffocating shroud, and all Lila could hear was the rhythmic drip of water echoing across the stone walls, each drop a countdown, a reminder of how time stretched and twisted in this hellish prison. She pressed her ear against the wall, listening for the sounds of footsteps, the distant clank of chains, the whispers of hope. But all that greeted her was silence, thick and heavy, a silence that gnawed at her sanity. "I remember the color of the sky," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was blue. So blue it hurt." She closed her eyes, conjuring memories of freedom that felt like a distant dream. She remembered the laughter of children, the sweet scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the air, the sun warming her skin as she ran through fields. But those memories were ghosts now, fading as the darkness closed in. Across the cell, Jace lay on the hard ground, staring at the ceiling, his fingers tracing patterns in the dust. The weight of despair pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He turned his head, locking eyes with Lila, and her heart raced. Would this be the moment? The moment they finally took a stand against the absurdity of their existence? "Lila, we can't wait any longer." "Tonight's the night," he said, his voice low but fierce, each word a challenge against their circumstances. A flicker of determination ignited in her chest, but it was quickly doused by fear. "What if we fail?" she asked, the question hanging in the air, sharp and heavy. "Failure is a part of this," he replied, sitting up. "We can't let fear chain us. Look where we are. Look at what we've become." Lila remembered the warmth of the sun on her face, the laughter that felt so far away now. She wanted to cling to those memories, but the brick walls of despair loomed larger than any hope. "Jace," she breathed, desperation seeping into her words, "what if we don't make it?" He stood abruptly, his eyes blazing. "What if we do? What if we burst through those doors and taste freedom once more? I refuse to let this place swallow us whole." She watched him, the fire in his eyes igniting a spark within her. Maybe it was the madness of the situation, or maybe it was the desire to feel something, anything, other than this numbing dread that gripped her. She nodded, a tremor of resolve coursing through her. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding in her chest. "But we need a plan. We need to act like shadows, silent, quick, and unseen." They spent the next few hours whispering, plotting, their voices low and frantic as the outside world remained oblivious to their desperation. Lila felt the air crackle with their nervous energy, a frenzied mix of fear and excitement. They had nothing left to lose, and in that realization, a grim determination settled over them. As night fell, the shadows enveloped the cell, creeping in like dark water. They waited until the guards made their rounds, a routine that felt both predictable and maddeningly arbitrary. Every tick of the clock echoed through Lila's mind, a relentless reminder of the time slipping away. "Now," Jace hissed, his voice barely a breath. They slipped from their cell like specters, hearts racing, pulses drumming a frantic rhythm in their ears. The corridors were dimly lit, the flickering torches casting eerie shadows that danced against the stone walls. Each step felt like a betrayal to every prisoner still locked away, every soul who had lost hope. Lila's stomach twisted with guilt, but with every heartbeat, the desire to escape overshadowed the pain of abandoning those who might never leave. They crept along the cold stones, lingering in the shadows, every noise amplified in the stillness. The air grew thick with tension, and each corner they turned felt like it could lead to freedom or death. She could feel Jace beside her, his presence a tether pulling her forward. "We're almost there," he whispered, and just as he said it, a door creaked open ahead, revealing a guard, his expression blank and unaware. Time froze. Lila felt her heart pound in her throat, the world narrowing to the guard's flickering torchlight, illuminating the terror in her eyes. "Run!" Jace shouted, breaking the spell, as they bolted down the corridor, footsteps echoing like thunder. She could hear the guard shout behind them, the sound of metal clashing against metal. The adrenaline surged through her veins, propelling her forward, past the darkness that sought to consume them. "We can't stop. Keep moving!" Jace cried, and she pushed harder, fear fueling her escape. But the walls felt like they were closing in, the shadows stretching out to grasp at her ankles, dragging her back into the abyss. They rounded another corner, breathless, fear clawing at their throats. The exit loomed ahead, a glimmer of hope piercing through the darkness. Lila could almost taste the freedom, almost feel the cool night air on her skin, wrapping around her like a lover's embrace. She reached for it, reached for the brightness beyond the door. But it wasn't enough. The guard was close now, footsteps pounding like a war drum, each step a reminder of the chains they had fought against. The door creaked ominously, and with every inch they gained, the weight of their past pulled them back. "Lila?" Jace yelled, and she turned to see him falter, the fear etched into his features. "Go. I'll hold him off." "No," she screamed, but he was already moving, a desperate act of bravery that stole the breath from her lungs. "Run," he shouted again, and it was a command she couldn't disobey. Tears stung her eyes as she tore herself away from him, the echoes of his sacrifice ringing in her ears. And just like that, she was alone, the world around her collapsing into chaos. The shadows chased her, but she pushed forward, her heart racing. She could feel the weight of desperation behind her, but she also felt the thrill of life beckoning her from the other side. She burst through the door, the cool night air hitting her like a splash of ice water. The stars glittered above her, a vast canvas of possibilities. She was free, but the price had been steep, and the echoes of Jace's sacrifice reverberated in her soul, a haunting reminder of what it meant to escape and the ghosts now trailing behind her. In that moment, Lila understood that freedom was never just a destination, it was a haunting, a choice, an act of defiance against the darkness that sought to claim them all. And as she ran into the night, she carried the weight of those left behind and the flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, their stories could weave into her own. The dungeon's air clung to the skin like a heavy, wet shroud, saturated with the scent of damp stone and despair. It was a suffocating silence, punctuated only by the faint rustle of chains and the quiet, agonized sobbing of a man who had once commanded armies. I could hardly breathe, but I remember every detail, the slick moss crawling across the cold walls, the flickering torchlight casting shadows that danced like mocking spirits. There he was, Marcus, the once mighty general, now reduced to a trembling shadow of himself. I watched as his fingers gripped the bars, knuckles white, and I could see the flicker of anguish in his eyes. It was the same look I'd seen in the mirror 1,000 times, a fierce battle against hopelessness, battling against the very essence of survival. I remember when he'd sneered at the thought of ever being captured. "Fools," he'd said, drunk on bravado. "The only chains I'll wear are the ones forged from glory." Yet here he was, shackled by fate, caught in a web of regret and fear. And beyond the iron bars, the shadows writhed, not just the shadows of the dungeon but the shadows of his past, decisions made in the heat of battle, lives taken that now haunted him like specters. I could almost feel their whispers, soft and sinister, curling around my consciousness. He was a coward, he was weak, he was supposed to be our savior. But the true prisoner here wasn't just Marcus. No, that title belonged to Clara, his wife, the woman who could have been a beacon in the darkness but instead was a flickering candle, barely holding on. I remember her laughter on sun-drenched hills, the way it used to fill the air like music. Now, she stood in a different light, a prisoner of the heart. She was not shackled, yet her spirit was bound as tightly as Marcus's wrists. The guards had brought her here to taunt him, to remind him of all he had lost. "Come see your husband," they jeered, a sadistic glimmer in their eyes as if her pain fed their cruel amusement. "Clara!" Marcus yelled, his voice crackling with desperation, a raw plea that echoed off the stone walls. Tears streamed down her face, carving paths of despair, and I could see the heaviness in her heart, a heart that still beat with love, yet felt the weight of betrayal, of loss. "You swore you'd return," she cried, her voice a haunting melody of sorrow, yet it was a refrain that had been sung too many times before. Her body trembled as she pressed her palms against the cold metal, as if willing him to break through, to somehow escape this nightmare. But this was the reality of dungeons in warfare. Not tales of gallant rescues or heroic confrontations, rather, a bitter replay of broken promises and hollow dreams echoing in the dark. The air was thick with the tension of choices made, of lives tangled in a complex web of loyalty and betrayal. I felt it pierce my chest, this suffocating sense of inevitability. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, one that promised a reckoning but offered no relief. Outside the dungeon, the sun hung high in a sky that seemed indifferent to their suffering. The clang of swords echoed from the training fields, laughter rang out among soldiers who would never understand the depths of this anguish. To them, war was a game, a chess match where pieces were expendable. But here, in this shadowy prison, the pieces had faces, names, and hearts that broke with every passing moment. Do you remember when we dreamed of our future? Clara's voice trembled as she leaned closer, her breath hitching in her throat. We talked of children, of a home filled with laughter. She trailed off, and I felt the weight of her dreams shatter like glass, sharp and painful. How could she bear it? How could love endure such a trial? Every day, Clara. Every day, I think of the life we could have had, Marcus rasped, his voice raw, heavy with longing and despair. I would trade my sword for a sliver of that future. Please don't lose hope. But hope was a fragile thing in this place, a flicker that danced just out of reach. The guards shifted outside, their laughter grating against the silence, a cruel reminder of the world beyond these walls. They spoke of the battles to come, of glory and conquest, casually dismissing the lives that hung in the balance. Let's see if he still has the heart of a warrior, one taunted, tossing a coin to another as if Marcus was merely a dog to be pitted against a rival. The sound of metal clinking against metal echoed and settled deep in my bones. In a moment of reckless defiance, Clara turned to the guards. You think you can break him? Her voice was trembling but fierce, the flicker of a flame that refused to be snuffed out. You think you can bend a man like that and mold him into your creature? He is a soldier, he has seen horrors you cannot imagine. But her defiance only drew their ire. One guard stepped closer, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. Maybe it's time to remind him of what he's fighting for. Or rather, what is lost. He turned, and with a casual wave, the door to Marcus's cell creaked open, an invitation to darkness. I could feel the air shift, the tension snapping into something electric and dangerous. No! Clara shouted, the word bursting forth like a dam breaking. It was a raw, desperate sound, filled with fear and yearning, an echo of everything they had built, now threatened by the spectre of violence. But it was too late. The guard stepped into the cell, a wolf among sheep, ready to set the stage for a cruel lesson. The moment hung heavy, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach, the kind of dread that promised chaos. I remember thinking, as the shadows deepened and the echoes of the past converged, that every moment in this dungeon was a thread woven into the fabric of war, a tapestry of pain, resilience, and unyielding love. The world outside was ablaze with ambition, yet here, in this suffocating darkness, the true war raged on, a battle against time, against fear, against the very essence of being human. And just like that, the wall seemed to close in, the chains clanked, and the air thickened with the promise of an impending storm, a confrontation that would resonate far beyond these prison walls. A candle flickers in the damp darkness, the flame a trembling heartbeat against the oppressive shadow of the dungeon walls. The stench of mold and despair hangs thick in the air, clinging like a forgotten prayer. I can hear the echoes of chains clanking, a symphony of suffering, punctuated by desperate whispers. They will come for you, a voice hisses from the corner, raw and trembling, yet laced with an unsettling certainty. It's the voice of Marta, her breath shallow, her spirit already half-broken by the weight of her own faith. I remember the day she first spoke of her doubts, her hands trembling like leaves in a storm. What if God is not the answer, she asked, wide-eyed, a flicker of rebellion igniting behind her pupils. The words hung in the air like a noose, tightening with every breath. What if our prayers are just echoes in the void? I dismissed her, laughed even, but her words burrowed deep within me, festering like an untreated wound. Now, I sit in this cold tomb, shackled not just by iron, but by shared fear and unspoken guilt. Across the dank cell, crouched in the corner, is Jonas. His eyes glimmer with a manic spark, a flicker of hope that feels almost cruel. Once, he was a scholar, revered for his devotion, now, he wears his heresy like a shroud. They're wrong, you know, he whispers, his voice hoarse but insistent. All of it. The scriptures are riddled with lies. The words tumble from his lips with an intensity that makes my heart hammer, each proclamation igniting a small rebellion within me. Even as I know the danger, the thrill of possibility surges like a wildfire. But what is faith without fear? Each confession, each whispered thought is a step closer to excommunication, a trip to the gallows. I feel it creeping in, the dread, thicker than the darkness. The priests, with their hoods pulled low, are coming. I can hear their footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing against the cobbled stones like thunder announcing a storm. They will demand our souls, and I wonder, what will they find? Is there salvation in this darkness, or merely the cold embrace of oblivion? Marta, I call, my voice trembling. She lifts her gaze, eyes glassy with unshed tears. What will we do? I clutch the iron bars, a futile attempt to grasp at some semblance of freedom. Her lips curl into a fragile smile, but it's the kind that only enhances the sorrow in her eyes. We fight, even in chains, she whispers, and for an instant, I can see the flicker of stubborn defiance that once lit her spirit aflame. We fight even if it means our death. Death! The word hangs heavy in the air, pregnant with unspoken fears. I remember the night the church declared heresy, the whispers flitting through the hallowed halls like restless spirits. I stood among the congregation, hollow-eyed and stunned, as the elders condemned those who dared to question the divine. My heart raced, a drumroll heralding despair. It was the first time I realized that faith could fracture, could splinter into 1,000 shards, each sharp enough to cut deep. But this dungeon, this place of shadows and echoes, this is where our souls hang in the balance. I can hear the distant chanting of the priests, a grotesque hymn to their twisted devotion. Repent! Repent, they cry, their voices rising like a storm. It feels like a funeral dirge for our freedom, and the walls close in like a vice, squeezing the last remnants of hope from our bones. Marta! Jonas! I cry out, desperation twisting my insides like a serpent. The walls pulse with our shared fear, a growing cacophony of dread. We must not let them win. We are more than what they see. But the truth is, I don't know if we are. I feel the chains biting into my skin, the cold metal a constant reminder of our powerlessness. Each rattling echo reminds me of the cost of defiance. They'll strip away your faith, piece by piece, a voice whispers from the shadows, and my gaze snaps to the darkness. I see a figure, tattered robes, a face lined with despair. It's an old priest, a man who once preached of salvation but now lingers in this abyss, a ghost of his former self. They seek to excommunicate not just your souls but your very essence, he rasps, each word laced with bitterness. Don't let them rob you of your truth. His words cut deep, raw, and lacerating, and I feel the flicker of rebellion ignite once more. If we are to burn, let us do it brightly. We will not be forgotten. I scream into the void, the sound echoing back to me, a call to arms that reverberates off the stone walls. Marta's eyes gleam, a spark of life igniting the dim cavern of our despair. Yes! Let them hear us, she shouts, her voice rising like the dawn breaking through the night. Jonas stands, trembling but resolute, and suddenly we are a trio on the precipice of rebellion, the weight of centuries pressing down on us. Let them come, he bellows, defiance coursing through his veins like fire. We are more than their shadows. And in that moment, I feel the chains of my own fear begin to crack, splintering under the weight of our united voices, our shared dreams. We are no longer just prisoners in this dungeon, we are rebels, warriors of faith, our cries reverberating through the damp stone, rising like smoke into the ether, challenging the heavens above. The night is still dark, but our hearts are ablaze with the understanding that we will fight, even if it means losing everything. The echo of our defiance dances on the air, swirling like a tempest, as the priests draw near, their footsteps growing louder. Yet, with each thud, we are no longer afraid. We are ready to confront the shadows, to embrace the darkness and transform it into light. Faith, in all its haunting beauty, becomes our weapon. We rise, bitter and bold, and the dungeon may be our grave, but it will also be our altar, the place where we refuse to bow, where we clutch our truth so fiercely that it burns with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The air is thick, sour with despair, as I crouch in the dim corner of this stone cell. It's cold, so cold that my breath hangs in the air like a spectre, a ghost of the warmth I once knew. They say shadows have a way of whispering secrets, but all I hear is the relentless drip of water from the ceiling, each drop a reminder of time slipping away, each echo a reminder of my isolation. I remember the laughter, the lightness of being free, just a breath away from danger, but never truly touched by it, until that night. It was a night that turned into a wailing silence. Captured, dragged into this darkness. I wonder if the sun still shines outside, if the world still spins with the same laughter and love, while I languish in this forgotten pit. I hear her cries before I see her. A hard, jagged sound that cuts through the thick silence like a knife. It's a sound I recognize, a sound that haunts my nightmares. It's Ilara. Her spirit is fierce, but the wretchedness of this place is wearing her down. I can't see her yet, but I can feel her energy, her fire, smoldering like embers in the night. Ilara! I rasp, my voice barely making it through the suffocating darkness. Is that you, Myra? She calls, her voice trembling, a mixture of hope and despair. I can almost see her, a silhouette against the cold stone walls, a wounded bird trying to fly. Yes! I whisper, urgency clawing at my throat. Are you all right? The question is foolish, we both know the answer. The chains clink, a soft, haunting melody that resonates in the stillness, like a chorus of forgotten souls. No, she admits, her voice cracking like glass. They come at night. The shadows, they know our names. I shiver. The shadows have faces, twisted and grotesque, their laughter echoing off the damp walls. They loom larger when the moon is full, when nightmares come alive and captors become demons. What did I do to deserve this? I was just a girl in a market, picking apples when they seized me, snatched from the vibrancy of life into this abyss. I remember the sun warming my cheeks, the scent of ripe fruit in the air, and the merchant's banter. They bathed once a year, I chuckled darkly to myself, so maybe romance was a bit earthy. Ilara sobs quietly, the sound like ice cracking underfoot. I wish I could dream of something beautiful, she whispers. But all I see are the faces of those who took us. They come, and I am nothing but a vessel for their cruelty. I can feel her pain, a mirror reflecting my own despair. Remember when we danced? I ask, desperate to pull her from the precipice of hopelessness, to remind us of who we once were. In the fields, with the daisies, before this darkness. They were golden, she responds, her voice softening as if recalling a fading memory. Golden like the sun. But now, her voice drifts away, swallowed by the shadows that cling to us like old, tattered garments. The door creaks open, a sudden burst of light illuminating the cell. It's fleeting, a mocking flash that disappears as quickly as it came, leaving us in the dark once more. A figure looms, a silhouette carved from the nightmares of the night. My heart races, an animal trapped in a cage. Time to play, the figure says, voice smooth like oil, dripping with malice. I can't see his face, but I can feel his eyes on me, hungry and cruel. I can feel the weight of my own fear pressing down, stifling my breath. He steps into the cell, and I feel Ilara's hand slip into mine. It's small, fragile, but it pulses with life. Somehow, in this abyss, we are still alive, and where there is life, there is hope. I squeeze her hand, grounding us both in this harrowing moment. Leave her alone. I spit, my voice stronger than I feel. It's absurd, this tiny act of defiance, but it ignites a spark within me. I've forgotten what it feels like to fight, to resist. The figure laughs, the sound a chilling breeze that steals my breath. You think you have a choice, he taunts. You're already lost. But I remember. I remember the way the world felt before the chains, the joy of existence, the taste of freedom. My memories are sharp, vivid, and they pierce through the fog of despair. I look at Ilara, her eyes wide with terror, but I see something else, a flicker of resolve. What if we are not lost? I whisper, my heart pounding like a war drum. What if we are still here, breathing, waiting for the moment to strike back? What moment? Ilara's voice is insistent, a pull against my rising hope. The moment we refuse to be afraid, I answer, the words spilling from me like water from a broken dam. What if we become the shadows they fear? The figure's smile falters, just for a heartbeat, but it's enough. It's a crack in his armor, a glimpse of vulnerability. You think you can challenge me? He asks, a soft menace lacing his words. Why not? Ilara's voice, once trembling, now resonates with a newfound strength. We are not just bodies in chains, we are souls that refuse to be silenced. And in that moment, the air shifts. It's electric, charged with possibility. We are no longer just captives, we are warriors, rising from the ashes of despair. The laughter of our captor is swallowed by the roar of our rising fury. The shadows pulse, and we take a breath, deep and full of life, the first taste of freedom crackling in our veins. In the darkness, the dungeons begin to tremble, the very fabric of captivity rattling against the force of our defiance. And as we brace ourselves for the confrontation, I know this is only the beginning. The chains are heavy, but they cannot bind our spirit. In this moment, we are not just women in dungeons, we are the storm, the reckoning, the echoes of 1,000 voices rising against the night. And as the shadows creep closer, we stand together, defiant and unyielding. Because we remember. We remember the light, the laughter, the freedom, and we will never let it go. Not now, not ever. The walls closed in, their stones damp with memories of forgotten screams, laughter, and the slow decay of time. I could hear the echoes of footsteps that faded like whispers in the night, a dance of shadows that lingered long after the last flicker of torchlight had vanished. Here, in the heart of the dungeon, the air was thick with despair, an oppressive weight that bore down on me like a shroud. It smelled of moss and iron, of a world steeped in darkness, yet it was a darkness that had once thrived, pulsing with life. Jasper! The voice shattered the stillness, raw and ragged. It belonged to Elara, her eyes wild, as if she had just clawed her way back from the abyss. She stood there, framed by the flickering torchlight, a ghost in a graveyard of stone. We need to leave, now. But my feet were rooted in the past, anchored by the haunting allure of what had once been. I could feel the pulse of the dungeon beneath me, the faint thrum of lives long extinguished. Each heartbeat echoed like a ghostly reminder. I remember the stories, the legends of heroes and monsters, of feasts held in shadowy halls beneath the earth. They bathed once a year, you know, so the romance was earthy. Yet somehow, in that damp and forgotten space, the absurdity of it all stirred a bitter sweetness in my chest. It was never just a dungeon, Elara, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of reverence and melancholy. It was a sanctuary, a cradle of ambition and despair. In the depths of my heart, I felt the tug of history, the intoxicating essence of lives lived and lost, the promise of adventure and the spectre of dread. Sanctuary. She spat the word like it was poison. You think those stones cared about the dreams of the dead? Look around, Jasper. It's just a tomb now. Her hands trembled, and I could see the fear clawing at her, raw and desperate. I wanted to pull her close, to shield her from the cold embrace of reality. I wanted to tell her that we could reclaim this place, transform it, if only we could breathe life back into its bones. But the truth was heavier than the stone, a weight I couldn't shake off. I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of a memory, of laughter echoing down the halls, of promises made under candlelight, the warmth of companionship that had withered away with time. Do you remember the festival? Elara's voice softened, as if the mere mention could conjure the past. The revelry, the music. I nodded, the memory flooding back like a tide, overwhelming and beautiful. It was a night when the world felt alive, when the dungeon sang rather than mourned. We had danced until dawn, our laughter weaving through the darkness, binding us in that ephemeral magic. But now the silence was a scream, a cacophony of ghosts who haunted our footsteps, mocking our every recollection. The shadows stretched long, and I felt the chill seep in, wrapping around me like an old shroud. Elara's face fell, and I could see the shadow of doubt creeping into her heart. She was torn between the thrill of what had been and the stark reality of what lay ahead. Sometimes, I think the stones are alive, I murmured, tracing the rough texture of the wall with my fingertips. They remember. The walls felt like the skin of a giant, and I wondered what secrets they held, what regretful sighs were pressed into their surfaces. I could almost hear them whispering, calling forth the souls trapped within. But they've forgotten how to dream. Elara's eyes narrowed. Then let's not become like them. Her determination sliced through the air, sharp and unyielding. We have to leave this place. It's a relic, a grave. Each word fell like a stone, heavy and final. But my heart twisted, aching for the remnants of a world once vibrant. And what will we do outside? The city is a cage, just a different kind of dungeon. You can't pretend the world is any kinder. I was fighting against currents I couldn't fully see, but I felt their pull, fierce and relentless. Maybe it's time to break the cycle, she shot back, her voice rising with fervor. Maybe we can repurpose it, turn it into something beautiful. The idea hung in the air, a fragile thread spun from desperation and hope. Could we? I could see the spark igniting in her eyes, her spirit burning brighter against the encroaching darkness. The walls around us may have absorbed sorrow, but they could also absorb joy, laughter, and life. Imagine a garden, Ilara, I said, my mind whirling with the possibilities. A place where people gather, where laughter fills the air once more, where the echoes of the past don't haunt but inspire. My heart raced, each beat a drum heralding a new dawn, a clash against the despair that threatened to swallow us whole. But she shook her head, caught in the web of her fears. And what if it doesn't work? What if we fail to breathe life into this grave? Then we'll carve out our own stories, I replied, gripping her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her skin against the cold stone. We'll turn this place into a testament to resilience, to change. We are not the ghosts of this dungeon, we are its future. In that moment, the air shimmered with a tension that was almost electric, as if the very stones were listening, waiting for our declaration. The heartbeat of the dungeon pulsed beneath us, an ancient rhythm that beckoned, daring us to step into the unknown. Ilara took a breath, her resolve flickering like the torchlight. All right, she whispered, a tremor in her voice, a pact sealed in whispers and hopes. Let's do it. But as the words left her lips, the shadows breathed a sigh, and I felt the weight of the past whispering, reminding us that in the face of change, the ghosts of abandonment would not fade quietly. They lurked in the corners, waiting for our first falter, ready to drag us back into the depths of despair. I remember the feeling, the spark of something new against the ever-looming chill of what had been. It was a fragile flicker of hope, a heart beating bravely against the silence. A choice suspended in time, teetering on the edge of what was and what could be. And just like that, the dungeon held its breath, poised at the precipice of transformation, caught in a moment that could stretch into eternity, awaiting the next heartbeat that would either shatter the silence or forge a new beginning. The damp air clung to my skin, a suffocating embrace that brought with it the scent of earth and decay. Shadows danced with cruel delight, flickering only when the torchlight brushed against the stone walls of this forsaken dungeon. I heard it, the soft, hopeless sobs echoing from the dark corners, a chilling symphony that echoed through the chill of my own heart. This was not a place for the faint of spirit. Every heartbeat reverberated like a drum, pounding a relentless reminder of the anguish trapped within these cold, cruel walls. Evelyn knelt in the corner, her fingers tracing the cracks in the stone, as if she sought to find a hidden escape route, a way out of the nightmare that had consumed her life. I could see her eyes, once bright with dreams, now clouded by despair. I remember, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the air, the way the sunlight danced on the meadows, the laughter of children, each word fell like a weight, heavy and sorrowful, anchoring her deeper into the past she could no longer grasp. A flash of movement pulled my attention, and there, huddled against the opposite wall, was Marcus, his face shadowed by the darkness but illuminated by an inner storm. He was the type who once wore bravery like armor, yet here he was, stripped to the bone, shivering in the damp chill of the dungeon, weighed down by guilt that threatened to suffocate him. "You think this is punishment?" he spat, his voice laced with bitterness. "I've suffered far worse." The words hung in the air like a noose, taut and ready to snap. I felt the tension coil, a serpent ready to strike. Their stories were intertwined, a tapestry of regret and sorrow, and beneath it all, a flicker of hope, a desperate yearning for redemption that pulsed like a living thing. "We will get out," I found myself saying, though I too was not sure if I believed it. "We will find a way." But the darkness whispered back, a voice as ancient as the stones themselves, reminding us of the futility of hope. "You can't escape what you are," it seemed to say. Evelyn's fingers stilled, and for a moment, I saw her gaze flicker, as if the shadows had reached out to caress her cheek with icy fingers. "What if we don't?" she murmured, her voice trembling. What if we're meant to stay here, forever? The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening like molasses, squeezing the breath from our lungs. In that moment, I saw them, not just the two of them, but the echoes of the countless souls who had come before us, trapped in the dungeons of their own making, shackled by regrets and fears. I remembered the tales of the medieval dungeons, that grisly underbelly of forgotten history, where despair dripped like blood from the walls. They say the ghosts of the damned wander these halls, I said, trying to lighten the weight of our fate with a macabre joke. But it might just be the rats. Evelyn gave a shaky laugh, a ghost of a sound that echoed hollowly in the darkness. Rats? Better than the alternative, being haunted by my own bad decisions. Her humor was fragile, a thin veneer cracking under the pressure of reality. Marcus chuckled, but it was a sound edged with pain. Maybe the rats are the lucky ones. They get to leave. His voice trembled with the weight of his own demons, and the laughter faded into silence, replaced by the heavy thudding of our hearts and the unrelenting pulse of despair. I felt the tension weave tighter, the air crackling with the unspoken truths that clung to our souls like grime. Time stretched painfully, each moment an eternity, every second a reminder of our entrapment. I remember, I whispered, drifting into the past, where the echoes of innocence lingered like ghosts, the nights spent dreaming of adventure, of castles and nights, of distant lands where the sun shone bright. But here, that sun was but a memory, the dreams of youth swallowed whole by the darkness. I looked at them, the two broken souls beside me, and my heart ached for their pain, for the burdens they bore. We're still alive, I said, my voice fierce, a flame flickering against the encroaching night. We can still fight. Evelyn looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and I saw the flicker of hope reignite, tenuous but present. Fight, she echoed, her voice trembling. What do we even have left to fight for? Each other, I replied, filled with a fierce determination. We are here. We're still breathing. That counts for something. But as the words left my mouth, the shadows shifted, as if mocking our small spark of defiance. The dungeon itself seemed to scowl, the stones groaning under the weight of countless stories untold. I felt the cold creep into my bones, threatening to extinguish the flickering flame of hope. Then came the sound, the heavy, deliberate footfall echoing against the stone, a reminder that we were not alone. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in shadows, predatory eyes glinting with malice. The air crackled with tension, a palpable fear that filled the room like the dense fog of despair. I could feel the three of us draw closer together, our hearts pounding in a frantic rhythm, a desperate drumbeat against the impending dread. Remember, the figure hissed, its voice dripping with venom, there are fates worse than death. As the darkness thickened, I realized we were not just prisoners of these walls, we were captives of our own fears, our own choices, our own dungeons of the mind. Evelyn's hand trembled against mine, and I could feel the unspoken bond of shared terror, of mutual desperation. What had once been simple shadows now loomed large, closing in on us, and I knew in that moment, the real battle was not just against the darkness around us, but against the darkness within. The horror of the past, the mistakes that chained us, the ghosts that haunted our minds, this was our true dungeon, and the walls were closing in. In the flickering torchlight, I found myself staring at the abyss, and the abyss stared back, ready to swallow us whole. Our breaths mingled, a desperate whisper against the growing silence, and in that heartbeat, the world outside continued to spin, unaware of the storm brewing within. And as the darkness surged, I felt the weight of history pressing down, urging us to confront the very fears that had built the dungeons of our souls. I could only hope that together, we might find a way to break free. Time stood still, and the shadows thickened, lingering with an exquisite tension that promised nothing but uncertainty.